The wheel went on Barrow Hill at 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, and the sound it made was not a crack but a long iron scream, the noise of a hoop letting go of the wood it had held for 11 months. The travelling chariot of the Duke of Harbury was 3/4 of the way down the descent with the drag shoe on and the whole weight of the carriage thrown forward. Job Tapper, who had driven that road 400 times, felt the offside for wheel drop away beneath him the way a floor drops in a dream. He had time to shout one word. He did not get to the end of it. The chariot went over on its side, slid 20 feet on the wet chalk, and stopped against the flint bank with its wheels turning in the air. The horses screamed. The Dowager Duchess of Harbury, 61 years old and reading a letter, was flung against the far door and broke her collarbone on the pull strap. Job Tapper broke his left arm in 2 places and walked afterwards with a stick. Kit Fenn, who was 15 and who rode postilion because his mother could not feed him otherwise, went under the body of the carriage as it turned and died before they got the horses cut loose. 9 miles away, in a shop that smelled of elm shavings and linseed and cold ash, Dinah Verrall was cutting the tongue of a spoke and did not know any of it yet. She had a boxwood gauge between her teeth and both hands on the spoke shave, and she was taking the last curl of oak off in a single ribbon, the way her father had taught her, because a tongue pared in 3 cuts never sits as true as one pared in a single pass. She spat the gauge into her palm, set it over the tongue, and held both up to the light of the open door. It fitted. It fitted the way a lid fits a box. She had been the wheelwright at Harbury Court for 9 months, since the June morning they carried her father out of that same door under a sheet with sawdust still in the creases of his hands. Josiah Verrall had held the shop for 41 years, and had trained exactly 1 apprentice in all that time. She was his daughter. He had done it because his wife had given him no sons, and because Dinah at 6 years old had stood in the yard and told him which of 2 wheels leaning against the wall had the better dish, and had been right. The village had not liked it then and did not like it now. But no one else within 11 miles could bore a nave true, and so it went on. Toby Skeet, 16, came through the door at a dead run with his hat in his hand and his face the color of tallow, and Dinah knew before he spoke, because no boy runs like that with good news. "There's a carriage down on Barrow Hill," he said, "His Grace's chariot. Wheel come off of it." Dinah set the spoke on the bench with great care as though it might break. "Which wheel?" "Off fore." "Who was in it?" "Her Grace the old Duchess, and Job Tapper up." And Toby stopped, and his mouth worked, and he was a boy again instead of a journeyman. And Kit Fenn behind. "They're saying Kit's dead, Miss Verrall. They're saying the carriage come over on him." There was a long silence in the shop. Out in the yard a blackbird went on singing, as though the world were unchanged. "Get the cart," Dinah said. The road up Barrow Hill was 4 inches of March chalk slurry, and it took them an hour. Long before they came to the place they began to pass people walking down, 2 carters, a hurdle maker, 3 women from the cottages at Ashlade, with their aprons over their arms, all going the other way, all looking. One of the women, whom Dinah had known since they were girls together, turned her face to the hedge as the cart went by. The verdict had been reached on that road before ever she got to the top of it, by people who had never seen the wheel and never would. The chariot lay against the flint bank with its panels stove in and its lamp glass in the grass, and a dozen men from the home farm were there with ropes. Somebody had spread a horse blanket over a shape at the roadside and weighted the corners with stones, and Dinah made herself look at it and stand still for the length of 10 breaths, and then she went to find the wheel. It was 30 yards further down on its side in the ditch, and it was not so much broken as unmade. She crouched over it in the wet, with her hands on her knees, and did not touch it. The nave had split clean through, from the mortise of one spoke to the mortise of the spoke opposite, the way a log splits when the wedge goes home. 4 spokes had come out of it entire, their feet still square and sound. The iron tire had rolled off and lay further down, half sunk in the mud like a great black wedding ring. The felloes had opened at 3 joints, and at one the ash had snapped clean across the grain. She looked at the split nave for a long time. "Elm splits last of all the woods," said her father, out of 9 months of silence, in the flat voice he kept for the bench. "That's why we use it. The grain in elm runs every road at once, and nothing gets a purchase on it. When elm splits, girl, you don't ask what elm did, you ask what was done to elm. You'd best come away from that." The voice was Mr. Crale's. He came down the verge with his coat skirts held clear of the mud, the Duke's coachmaster, a neat, dry, contained man of 50, with a face like a locked drawer, and behind him at a distance came a knot of grooms who stopped where they were and watched. "It's my wheel," Dinah said. "I'll look at it. It's the coroner's wheel now. There's a boy dead, and it is a wheel out of your shop with your father's mark on the nave hoop, and I'd have thought you would have the sense to keep it home." She straightened. She was a tall woman, and in the yard boots and the leather apron she had not stopped to take off. She stood eye to eye with him. "When did the tire come off?" she said. Crale blinked. "What? The tire? Did it leave the wood before the wheel went, or after? Did Tapper hear iron first or timber first? It matters more than anything else anybody will ask today, and if you leave it 3 days, not one man here will remember. You will not be questioning his Grace's servants." "Then somebody had better," Dinah said. She looked past him, up the hill, and saw for the first time that the Duke was there. He stood at the head of the wreck, with his hat in his hand and the rain starting in his black hair, a tall man of 36, black greatcoat, mud to the knee, entirely still. He had been on that hill an hour, and in that hour he had helped 4 men lift a carriage off a boy who was already dead, and he had said almost nothing to anybody. Edmund Carew, 6th Duke of Harbury, looked down the slope at the wheelwright standing over her wheel in the ditch. Dinah looked back. Neither of them turned away, and afterwards she could not have said what was in his face, except that it was not yet hatred, and that it was very cold. Then he put his hat on and went to his mother's carriage, and the grooms moved, and the rain came on in earnest, and that was the end of the 4th of March. The wheelwright's shop stood at the bottom of the stable court, between the forge and the soppit, and had stood there since the 3rd Duke's time, a long low building with a beaten earth floor and a stone tiring platform in the yard outside. Every wall was hung with the tools of the trade in the order Dinah Verrall had hung them, which was the order Dinah kept, because a shop where a man must look twice for a chisel is a shop where wheels are made badly. On the shelf above the bench, where another woman might have kept a Bible, stood the shop books. There were 9 of them, calf-bound, foxed, the earliest begun in 1776, in a young man's careful hand. Every wheel that had left that shop in 41 years was in them, not the price, which was Mr. Palliser's affair, but the making of it. Date, vehicle, height, spokes, the timber where it was felled, how long it had stood in the stack. The dish, the circumference of the wheel by the traveller, the circumference of the tire the same way, and the difference between those two figures, which was the whole art of it, and which the trade called the draw. The traveller hung on its own nail by the door, a small iron wheel no bigger than a saucer, on a wooden handle worn black by 2 men's hands and 1 woman's. Its rim was exactly 1 foot round, and it had a nick filed in it for a starting mark. You set the nick against the mark on the felloe, and rolled it round the wheel, counting the turns aloud, and read the fraction over off the scale scratched in the handle. A wheel to measure wheels. Her father had said once that it was the only honest tool in England, because it could not be argued with and it could not be flattered. The books said turns and eighths. They had always said turns and eighths. Josiah Verrall had learnt his figures from a Salisbury wheelwright, who had learnt his from a man who could not read, and in that line of descent nobody had ever written down an inch in his life. A hoop that was 3/8 short was written 14t118 against 14t1 a faff, and a stranger opening the book would take it for cipher. Dinah lit a candle at 8 o'clock that night, and took down the book for the year 16. She found it at the 3rd page. The 29th of April 1816, a pair of 4 wheels, 4'6", 12 spokes, for the travelling chariot. Oak spokes cleft from the Wynyard oak, felled in 1809, cleft not sawn, so that the grain ran unbroken from foot to tongue, and no spoke had a short grain in it anywhere. Ash fellows out of the 7-year stack. Elm naves out of the butt of the great elm that had come down at Ashlade in the gale, seasoned 5 years in the round and 2 in the block. Dish 1 inch and a quarter. Wheel 14 turns and 1 inch and a half. Tire 14 turns and 1 inch and 1/8. 3/8 of an inch of draw in 14 feet of iron. She sat with her finger on the line and heard her father again. Draw is a knife you hold by the blade. Too little and the hoop runs slack. The fellow's work, the joints open, and in a year you've a wheel that eats itself. Too much, and you crush your own work. You dish it past its bearing. You drive the spoke shoulders into the fellows, and one day on a hill the nave lets go and somebody is killed. 3/8 on a carriage wheel, girl, never more. A man who gives you more than that is not saving your wheel, he is killing it slowly and calling it a favor. Underneath, in her own hand, was the entry she had written the day she helped set them, with her father sitting on the stone, because his chest was bad by then, and he could no longer swing the sledge, set both to May. Fair, J.V. Present, she closed the book and did not sleep. In the fortnight before the 4th of March, 3 things had happened that Dinah at the time had thought were separate. The first was that Mr. Silas Gorick, coachmaker of Melbury, had come to Harbury Court in a gig of his own building with yellow wheels, had spent an hour with Mr. Palliser, the land agent, and had gone away again. Gorick built well enough and charged like a surgeon, and he had wanted the Harbury carriage work for 6 years. What stood in his way was a shop at the bottom of the stable court that had cost the estate nothing but timber and 1 man's wages since 1776. The second was that Mr. Palliser had come down and asked her, pleasantly, what a wheelwright was worth to an estate in a year when wheat was at 52 shillings and half the tenants were behind. She had answered that a wheel wanted mending whether wheat was at 52 shillings or 110. He had smiled and made a note. The third was that the chariot's offside fore-wheel had gone away for a fortnight in February and come back again. It had gone because the coachman complained of a rattle. Dinah had heard of it only afterwards and had been angry and had then been busy with the home farm wagons and had let it go. A rattle in a fore-wheel is 9 times in 10 the box worn in the nave, the iron bearing that runs on the axle arm, and the cure is to pull the box and rebed it half a day's work. She would have done it for nothing. But Crail had sent the wheel to Gorrick's yard for painting, and for the rattle, and it had come back, painted, and the rattle gone. Sitting in the dark with the book shut under her hands, Dinah went over that fortnight the way you go over a floor looking for a dropped needle. They came for her at 9 the next morning, Crail, and a constable from Melbury who was embarrassed, and Mr. Palliser with a paper. The inquest on the body of Christopher Fenn would sit at 11 on the 7th at the Harbury Arms, before Mr. Ballantyne, coroner for the 100. She was required to attend and to answer. In the meantime, the shop was to be shut and the key given up, and she was to touch nothing that had come off Barrow Hill. On whose order? Dinah said. His Grace's, said Palliser, and he was watching her face when he said it, the way a man watches a dog he has just kicked. She gave up the key. It went into Crail's waistcoat pocket and lay there against his watch. Then she walked out through the stable court, with 3 grooms and 2 maids and the second coachman standing at the doors to see her go, and nobody spoke to her, and she went the long way round by the park wall so that she would not have to pass the laundry, where Hannah Fenn was. She did not manage it. Hannah Fenn was at the wall with a basket on her hip, waiting. She was a small woman of 40 with red hands. She had buried a husband in 1813 and had now buried nothing at all, because the boy still lay in the ice-house at the court until the coroner had done with him. They tell me it was your wheel, Hannah said. It was my wheel, Dinah said. She could have said more. She could have said, it was my wheel when it left me, and I do not yet know what it was when it came back. But she had nothing to stand that on but a fortnight in February and a line in a book, and a woman whose son is in an ice-house is owed better than a guess. Hannah Fenn looked at her for a long moment, and then she spat on the ground between them and picked up her basket and went in. The inquest sat in the long room of the Harbury Arms, with the shutters open and the March light coming in off the wet street, and there were more people in it than the room was built to hold. 14 jurymen from the parish. The coroner, Miss Ballantyne, a dry Melbury attorney with a habit of polishing his spectacles when he was about to be unkind. The Duke on a chair by the window, and along the back wall, 40 or 50 people from Ashlade who had left work to be there, and who looked at Dinah Verrall when she came in the way a congregation looks at the coffin. The wheel had been brought in and laid on 2 trestles in the middle of the floor. Somebody had rebuilt it. After a fashion, the 4 loose spokes laid roughly in their mortices, the 2 halves of the split nave set together, so that it looked less like wreckage than like a wheel that had been murdered. The tire stood leaning against the trestle, a black hoop taller than the table. Dinah's eye went to it the moment she came through the door and stayed there, and Toby had to touch her sleeve twice before she sat. They viewed the body first. That took 11 minutes, and Dinah kept her eyes on the floor. Job Tapper gave his evidence with his arm in a sling, and his face grey. Nothing had felt wrong on the level. He had put the shoe on at the top as he always did. Halfway down there had come a sound he described, after some difficulty, as a shriek, "Iron, sir," iron on iron, and then a great crack, and then the offside had gone from under him. "Iron first," Dinah said, quite clearly, from her place. "Miss Verrall," said the coroner, "you will speak when you are asked." Mr. Crail gave his evidence next, and gave it well. The wheel was 11 months old, and had been made in the estate shop. It had gone to Mr. Gorrick's yard in February for painting, at which time Mr. Gorrick's people had looked it over and said nothing against it, being unwilling, no doubt, to speak ill of another's work. He had understood the shop to be in competent hands. He had perhaps been mistaken. He was very sorry for the boy. Then Mr. Silas Gorrick was sworn, a broad, benevolent man of 55, in a good brown coat, coachmaker of Melbury these 30 years, who came and stood by the trestles and put his hand on the split nave as gently as a doctor. "It is a sad thing to have to say of a dead man's work," said Gorrick, "for I knew Josiah Verrall, and there was no better hand in Wiltshire in his day. But this wheel was under-tyred." There was a movement along the back wall. The coroner asked him to explain himself for the jury. Gorrick explained himself for the jury very well. "An iron tire," he said, "is made a little shorter than the wheel it must go on, then heated, dropped over, and cooled with water, so that it shrinks and binds the whole wheel together as tight as a fist, and the shortening is called the draw. If the draw is too little, the hoop never binds. The wheel works at every joint at every turn of the road. The joints open, the spokes move in the nave, and one day the nave splits and the wheel folds up like a fan." "And in your opinion," said the coroner, "was that what happened here?" "In my opinion, sir, that is what happened here. There is another thing, and I say it with regret. The elm of this nave was not seasoned. I would not have used it. I would have said so, had I been asked. And I was not asked." "Was he shown the book?" Dinah said. "Miss Verrall, every wheel out of that shop is entered in a book, with the timber and the season and the draw set down. It is on the shelf. It is 9 yards from this room. Has any man in this room opened it? Miss Verrall, you will be heard in your turn." Her turn came after 2 o'clock, and it lasted 20 minutes, and it went badly. She gave her evidence plainly. The wheels were made in April 1816 and set in May. The elm had stood 5 years in the round and 2 in the block. The spokes were cleft oak from the Wynyard tree of 1809. The dish was 1 1/4 inches. The wheel had measured 14 turns and 1 1/2 inches, the tire 14 turns and 1 1/8 inches, and the draw was therefore 3/8 of an inch. The draw her father had used on carriage wheels for 41 years, and the draw, she said, looking at Mr. Gorrick, of every wheelwright in England who means his wheels to last. "You say 3/8, said the coroner. "Mr. Gorrick says the hoop was slack. Both of you cannot be right." "No, sir, but only one of us can be measured. I beg your pardon. The hoop is standing against that trestle. Give me the traveller off the nail in my shop and 2 minutes, and I will tell this jury what that hoop measures, cold, today. Then send to the shop for the book and read what it measured in May of last year. If they agree, Mr. Gorrick is mistaken. If they do not agree—" She stopped, because she had come to the edge of the thing and had not yet let herself look over it. "If they do not agree," said the Duke, from the window, "what then, Miss Verrall?" It was the first time he had spoken. The room went very quiet. Then that hoop is not the hoop I put on that wheel, Your Grace, Dinah said. Or it is, and it has been altered since. Iron does not alter itself, said Gorick. Pleasantly, no, sir, said Dinah. It does not. That is my whole meaning, Mr. Palliser rose then and said, in the smooth voice of a man performing a kindness, that he had no wish to press hardly upon Miss Verrall, who was young and had lately lost her father, but that the jury should perhaps be reminded that the book she offered them was a book she herself had kept since June, and the tool she offered to measure with was a tool she herself would hold, and that where a boy had lost his life it was hardly to be wondered at if a woman looked for some cause other than her own hand. That, Dinah thought afterwards, was the moment the room was lost. Not Gorick's evidence, Palliser's kindness. Mr. Ballantyne polished his spectacles. He said the matter was of the gravest kind, and that the jury had heard skilled evidence of faulty work and unskilled denial of it, and that it was better to be slow in these cases than sorry. He would adjourn for 14 days, to the 21st of March. In the meantime, the wheel and the hoop would be kept under lock at the court, and Miss Verrall might examine them. Here he looked over his spectacles, in the presence of Mr. Crail and of one other person appointed by his grace, and might touch nothing that she did not first name aloud. Then he closed his book, and the room emptied past her, and out in the street somebody threw a handful of stable yard filth at the Harbury Arms wall, and it was not aimed at the wall. They gave her the coach house on the 9th of March, between 11 and 1, and Mr. Crail stood inside the door with the key in his hand and his watch open on his palm. The other person appointed by his grace was his grace himself. He came in without ceremony, took off his hat, put it on a mounting block, and stood with his arms folded where he could see everything. Crail's face did a small, complicated thing, and then shut again. Name what you touch, the Duke said. That is all. I am not here to help you or to hinder you. I am here because a boy is dead on my road, and I find I no longer care to be told what happened by other men. Dinah set down her basket. She had in it a 2-foot rule, a straightage of seasoned beech, a piece of chalk, a candle end, a bradawl, a pair of calipers, and the traveller, which Toby had got out of the shop window on the first night with a wire and had kept under his mattress for 4 days, like a boy hiding a knife. The fellows first, she said. I am touching the fellow arc. 3 of the 6 fellows had stayed together with their 6 spokes, one solid arc of wheel, the shape of a bent bow. She laid it face down on the flags, set the beech straightage across the outer faces of the fellows, measured down to the shoulder of the middle spoke 3 times, and chalked the figure on the flagstone. 2 inches and an eighth. The book says 1 inch and a quarter, she said. That is the dish. It is the cone the wheel is built to. The spokes lean outward from the nave, so that the wheel is not flat, but dished like a saucer. And when the carriage lurches and throws its weight sideways, the wheel takes the thrust down the length of the spoke instead of across it. A wheel with the right dish is a strong wheel. A wheel with too much dish is a bow drawn past its bend. And the dish increases, said the Duke, when the hoop is drawn too tight. That is the only thing on earth that can increase it. Wood does not creep of itself, and iron does not tighten of itself. To gain 7/8 of an inch of dish, your grace, something pulled that rim in hard, in heat, after the wheel was built. Crail said, or the timber gave. Green elm. I am touching the spoke shoulders, Dinah said. She turned the ark over, set the candle to it, and made them both come and look. Where the shoulder of each spoke met the inner face of the fellow, the oak was crushed, not worn, not weathered, but crushed, the fibres driven in and burst, the bruised wood beneath still pale and clean, and the colour of new bread. A wheel that works loose polishes itself, she said. Every joint rubs on every other joint, 10,000 times a mile, and in a year the faces come up smooth and rounded and black with road dirt, and the bolt holes go oval. That is what an under-tyred wheel looks like taken to pieces. I have taken 20 to pieces. Mr. Gorick has taken more than I have and knows it better than I do. She held the candle steady. There is not one polished face in this wreck. Every face in it is crushed, and every crushed face is clean underneath. This wheel was not eaten by slackness. It was squeezed to death. The Duke said nothing at all. Crail looked at his watch. I am touching the tire bed, Dinah said. The tire bed is the outer face of the fellows, where the hot hoop lies down on the wood. When iron at a black heat drops onto seasoned ash, it scorches it. And that scorch is one of the few honest things in the world, because it is made in 5 seconds and cannot afterwards be made again in the same place. The first scorch was there, deep and even and old, a band of brown all round. Over it, in 3 places, lay a second scorch, and the second scorch was black and crisp, and stood on top of the paint. Dinah put the candle down on the flags and knelt back on her heels. Mr. Crail, she said, when did that wheel go to Melbury? The 9th of February. And came back? The 23rd. And was painted there. It was painted there. That was the purpose. Then I will ask your grace to look at this and remember it, Dinah said, because I think it is the whole of the case. Here is the paint, Mr. Gorick's paint, laid on in February, black over the lead colour, and you may see the brush marks. And here and here and here is burnt wood lying on top of the paint. Charring over paint. The wood cannot burn under the paint once the paint is on it, and it cannot burn through the paint without burning the paint. And the paint is not burnt except where it is lifted at the edge of the char. There was a fire on this wheel after it was painted. There was a hot iron hoop laid on this wheel after the 9th of February. The coach house was so quiet that she could hear the horses in the stalls across the court. Somebody, said the Duke slowly, reset the tire. Somebody reset the tire. Why in God's name would they? For the rattle, Dinah said. Bringing up a tire is what a bad shop does for a rattle, because it is loud and quick and looks like work. The right cure is to pull the box out of the nave and rebed it, and it takes half a day and shows nothing when it is done. If you tell a customer, you have tightened his wheel, he goes away, satisfied. If you tell him, you have re-bedded a bearing, he asks why he is charged for it. Then I am to understand, said Crail, that Mr. Gorick, 30 years a coachmaker, cured a rattle by ruining a wheel. You are to understand that somebody did. She took the traveller out of the basket last. The hoop stood against the wall where they had leaned it, 4'6" across and a hand's breadth wide, its road face worn bright, and its inner face still black, with the mill scale of the forge that had made it. Dinah set the nick of the traveller against the weld, and knelt, and rolled it round the outside of the hoop, and counted aloud in the empty coach house. 1, 2, 3. The Duke came and stood over her without being asked. Crail did not move from the door. 12, 13, 14. The traveller came round to the weld again, and she stopped it with her thumb and read the scale on the handle in the light of the door. She read it twice. Then she sat back on the flags with her hands loose in her lap, in the dirt, in her father's leather apron, and for a moment she could not speak. "Say it," said the Duke. 14 turns and a quarter of an inch, Dinah said. "The book says 14 turns and an inch and an eighth. That hoop is 7/8 of an inch shorter today than it was on the 2nd of May last year." "Iron," said the Duke, "does not shrink." "No, Your Grace. Iron does not shrink. Iron gets cut." The Duke of Harbury sat up until 2 in the morning, with 9 calf-bound books on the table in front of him, and a decanter he did not touch. He had come to the title at 31 and to the estate at a bad time, and had spent 5 years learning that a great property is not a thing a man owns, but a thing that is done, every day, by 400 people, most of whom he could not have named. He was not a fool, and he knew he was not clever, and the difference between those two things was the whole of his character. He began at the earliest book, because he did not know what he was looking for. 1776, a pair of hind wheels for the brewer's dray, elm nave, 14 in, oak spokes 14, dish 158, wheel 16T 34, tire 16T 14, and underneath, in a young man's hand, nave shook at the bore, put by, made again out of the ashlayed butt. 2 days lost, own fault, wet timber. He turned pages for 4 hours, and somewhere about 1794 he stopped noticing the wheels and began noticing the man. Josiah Verrall had recorded his own errors for 41 years in the same hand and the same ink as his successes, in a book nobody but himself would ever read. He had never once, in 9 volumes, written down a price. He had never once written down an inch. That was the thing the Duke's eye finally caught, some time after 1 o'clock, and it caught it because he had spent an hour irritated by it. Every figure in every book was in turns and eighths. The traveller's turn was a foot, and the fractions were eighths of an inch, and the whole notation was a private language spoken by 2 people, one of whom was in the churchyard. He sat back and rubbed his eyes and thought, with something that was not yet shame, but was on the road to it, that he had shut that shop on the word of a man who had never opened one of these. Mr. Palliser came to him at 10 the next morning with a proposal, and the proposal was reasonable, which was the worst thing about it. There would be a subscription for the Fenn woman, £40, the estate to head it. There would be a stone for the boy, the wheelwright's shop, which had cost £230 in wages and timber these 3 years, and shown no return that could be set down in a column, would be closed at Lady Day. And the whole of the carriage and wagon work put out to Mr. Gorick at a fixed yearly sum, which was, Mr. Palliser wished to observe, remarkably moderate. Miss Verrall would be provided for. Mr. Gorick had generously offered her a place in his own yard at 18 shillings a week, more than her father had ever earned, on the single condition, natural in a man protecting his own name, that she should say nothing further at the adjourned inquest beyond, that she could not account for the accident. "And if she can account for it," said the Duke, "then she will say so, and be thought to be saying it to save her place, and the Fenn woman will have neither her son nor her £40, because there will be no subscription if the estate is at law with Melbury for 2 years. Palliser spread his hands. "I am not concerned with who was at fault. I am concerned with what it will cost. Those are different questions, and only one of them is mine." "They are the same question," the Duke said, if the answer to the first one is somebody in my own stable court. Palliser's face did not move, but he took a moment too long over the papers, and the Duke, who was not clever, was very good at that particular kind of noticing. Gorrick's offer was carried down to the shop-yard that afternoon by Mr. Crail, who delivered it standing, without taking off his hat. Dinah heard it out. 18 shillings a week, a shop with 4 benches, and a steam kiln, and a paint room, and a name over the gate that men would take their hats off to. And in return 1 sentence in a coroner's court, I cannot account for it. Tell Mr. Gorrick I am obliged to him, she said, and that I can account for it. 18 shillings, said Crail. Mr. Crayle, when the wheel came back from Melbury in February, did you look at it? I have no need to look at wheels. No, Dinah agreed. You have not. Somebody paid Mr. Gorrick's men for a fortnight's work on that wheel, and somebody signed the bill, and the bill will say what was done. Bills always do, because a shop that will lie to a customer will not lie to itself about what it is owed for. She wiped her hands on the apron. Where is the February account for the Melbury work? Crail said. With Mr. Palliser, and went away, and did not come back that day or the next. On the 11th, the Duke sent for her. She was made to wait 20 minutes in a corridor with 2 footmen looking through her, and then shown into the estate room, where the 9 books were still on the table, and the Duke stood at the window with his back to the door. Turns and eighths, he said, without turning round. Your Grace, 41 years of it. Not 1 inch in 9 volumes. He faced her. He looked as though he had not slept much. I have read your father. I do not know whether I have read a good wheelwright, because I cannot judge that. I know I have read an honest man. He was both, Dinah said. Your measurement of the hoop is worth nothing as it stands. You understand that. You measured it, with your tool, against your book. Mr. Palliser has already put it to me in those words, and he is right, and the jury will think so too. Yes, your Grace. Then you had better find me something that is not yours. He came round the table. The shop is opened again from this hour. Crail will give up the key at the door, and he will not like it. The wheel and the hoop go down to you this afternoon under your own lock, and you will do whatever it is you need to do to them, and you will do it where the parish can walk in and watch you do it. I want no more of this in a coach house with the doors shut. Dinah stood very still. You are giving me the evidence, she said, in the same building where I sleep. I am. Your Grace, if I am the guilty party, that is a mad thing to do. Yes, said the Duke of Harbury, it is. 10 days ago I would not have done it. He turned back to the window. Take it and be quick. I have promised the coroner a case, and at present I have a dead boy, a woman nobody will speak to, and a hoop that has got shorter by itself. On the 12th of March, Mr. Palliser sent 2 men down to the shop with a hamper and a written order, and took away the 9 books. The order was correctly drawn. The coroner had a right to inspect the documents in the case. They were to be lodged at the estate office and produced in court on the 21st, and Miss Verrall might apply to see them in the presence of a clerk. Dinah read it twice in her own doorway with sawdust on her sleeves, then went to the shelf and took the books down herself and put them in the hamper in order, oldest first, and shut the lid. Tell Mr. Palliser they are numbered, she said. Tell him I know how many pages are in the 16. She did not know how many pages were in the 16. She had never counted them, but she said it. and she watched the elder of the two men to see whether he would carry it back. And he did, and it made no difference at all. The fire started some time after 1 o'clock on the morning of the 13th, in the shavings under the long bench, at the end nearest the saw-pit. Toby Skeet was asleep in the loft over the paint store. He woke because the pigeons went up off the roof, which is a thing he told people afterwards and which nobody but a country person believes, and came down the ladder into a room already the color of a forge at welding heat. The shop held 41 years of shavings and dry offcuts, and linseed and pitch and stacked seasoned ash, and it went up like a bonfire built for the purpose. He got out through the yard door with the skin off both palms because the latch was hot, and stood in the stable court in his shirt and screamed for water until the grooms came. They saved the forge and the saw-pit and the roof of the coach-house by throwing wet blankets on it, and by 4 in the morning the wheelwright's shop of Harbury Court was a rectangle of white ash with the stone tiring platform standing in it, and Dinah Verrall was standing on the platform in her nightgown and her father's coat, in the rain, watching the last of the roof timbers burn. The wheel had been on the trestles by the long bench. That was where the fire started. By 7 in the morning half the parish was at the gate, and Dinah heard what they were saying because they were not trying to be quiet. She had burnt it. Of course she had burnt it. She had wheedled the evidence out of the Duke into her own keeping and set a match to it on the second night, and the poor boy in the loft nearly with it, and there was a woman for you. And what did his Grace expect? She heard it, and understood exactly how it looked, and went on doing what she had begun at 5 o'clock, which was to rake the ashes 6 inches at a time, on her hands and knees, in a grid she had marked out with pegs and string. The Duke found her there at 9. He had come from the house bareheaded, and he stood at the edge of the string grid with his boots in the wet ash, and looked at what was left of 200 years of shop, and Dinah did not get up. "They are saying I did it," she said. "I am aware of what they are saying. Do you believe it?" "If I believed it," said the Duke, "I would have come with the constable. Get up out of that." "No, Your Grace." She moved the rake another 6 inches. "Iron does not burn." He stood there a moment. Then, to the considerable astonishment of the 2 footmen who had followed him, the 6th Duke of Harbury took off his coat, laid it on the tiring platform, knelt down in the ash in his shirt sleeves at the far end of the string, and began to rake towards her. They found the nave hoops at 10:30, 2 flat iron bands, warped and blued, that had bound the elm at the front and back of the nave. They found the box, the iron bearing out of the middle, unhurt. They found nails, and the hinge of the tool chest, and a spokeshave with the wood burnt off it, and the iron heads of 4 of her father's chisels, which she put in her apron pocket without comment. And they found the tire bolts. She laid them out on the tiring platform in the order she found them, and when the grid was finished, she knelt over them, and did not move for so long that the Duke came and stood at her shoulder. "Well?" "6 bolts hold a tire on a wheel of that size," Dinah said. 6. It is in the book for that wheel, and it is in the book for every wheel of that size my father ever made, and you have read them, Your Grace, so you know that it is. I know it. Count them." He counted them. There were 8. "And these 6, said Dinah, touching them one at a time, "have heads my father forged, and you may see the hammer on them, 4 facets, and the 4th one short, because he swung a little left-handed at the finish, and I could pick his work out of a barrel in the dark. And these two, she picked up the last pair and turned them in the light, are machine bolts, cut on a screw plate, not upset by hand. There is not a screw plate of that thread on this estate. There is one in Melbury. The Duke let out a breath. 2 extra bolts, he said. When you cut a hoop shorter and weld it up again, Dinah said, the 6 holes in the iron no longer come over the 6 holes in the wood. They cannot. You have taken the best part of an inch out of the circle, and everything in it has moved. So you drill 2 new holes where they will do, and you drive 2 of your own bolts through them, and you paint over the hole and hand it back. And no man in England looks at a bolt in a wheel from one year to the next. She set them down. There is my case, not the book, not my tool, not my word. 2 bolts out of Melbury in a Harbury wheel, and a count that anybody in that room can do on their fingers. The books came back to her from the estate office at 4 that afternoon, released by the coroner's clerk, all 9, in the hamper, in order, oldest first. She sat on the tiring platform among the wet ashes with the 16 open on her knees, and found the entry for the 29th of April and the setting on the 2nd of May, in her father's hand and her own. And underneath, on the line where the timber note should have gone, in an even, careful, unhurried imitation of her handwriting. 3 May. Chariot 4 wheels, tires brought up 3/4 inch to tighten. D. V. She looked at it for a long time. The rain came on again, and she put her hand over the page to keep it off. Toby, whose hands were bandaged to the wrist, said, "What does it say?" "It says I did it," Dinah said. "It says I set those tires on the 2nd, and on the 3rd I put them back in the fire and drew them 3/4 of an inch tighter and killed that boy myself 11 months before he died. That's a lie." "Yes," she said. "It is a very good lie, Toby. It is the only lie that fits every fact anybody has left." She looked up, and her face had changed, and afterwards Toby said he had been frightened of her for the first time in his life. And whoever wrote it does not know a wheel from a wheelbarrow. He has written it in inches. There was no hoop in the ashes. Dinah went over the grid a 2nd time on the 14th and a 3rd time on the 15th with a magnet on a string. And there was no hoop, and there could not have been a fire hot enough to take 4'6" of wrought iron out of a wooden building and leave the box and the nave bands lying whole. The tire had gone out of the shop before the shop burned. She sat on the platform in the cold with that fact and turned it over, and it was, when she had finished, the best thing that had happened to her in 11 days. A man who burns a building to destroy a wheel does not first carry the iron out of it. He carries the iron out because he wants it, or because somebody with more sense has told him that a hoop does not burn, and that a hoop found in the ashes with 2 welds in it would hang him. She began at the forge, because iron always ends at a forge. Ezra Dunnage had been the smith at Harbury Court for 26 years, a slow, heavy, sandy man who spoke about once an hour, and who had made, over a 1/4 of a century, every tire Josiah Verrall ever set. The 2 of them at the fire in the yard, the smith swearing, and the wheelwright counting. An old marriage of a kind. He had come to the funeral in June and stood at the back and had not been able to say anything at all to Dinah, and had shaken her hand so hard he hurt it. She asked him whether any iron had come to him in the last week. Ezra put down the horseshoe he was holding. He went to the door and looked out at the yard for a while. Then he went round the back of the forge, into the nettles and the ash heap and the rubbish of 26 years, and pulled off a sheet of tarred canvas with a brick on each corner. The hoop was underneath it. Tuesday night, Ezra said. Crail's man brought it down on a barrow. Says to me, "Cut that up for muck cart hoops in the morning," he says. "There's 4 good hoops in it." Dinah found she had to hold the doorpost. "You did not cut it?" "No," Ezra scratched his jaw. "That's coroner's iron. Come off a wheel a boy died under. I don't cut that up for muck carts on a man's say-so at 8 at night." He considered further. "And your father made me weld that hoop. I'd know it in a ditch." They carried it into the forge and stood it in the good north light of the open door, and Dinah went round it on her knees with a wire brush and a wet rag, and Ezra went round it the other way, and what they were looking for they found in 11 minutes. There were 2 welds in it. The first was Ezra's own, a long scarf, the 2 ends of the bar drawn out thin over 4 inches, and lapped and beaten together, the join filed off smooth, worn on the road face to a polish, dark all through, with the even blue-black scale of a hoop that has been 11 months in the weather. The second was 3 feet round the circle from the first, and it was a different animal altogether. Short, upset, the iron thickened at the join where somebody had jumped the ends together instead of scarfing them properly. In a hurry, in a yard, before the light went. The inside face had never been filed at all, and stood proud under her thumb with the hammer facet still on it. A hair crack ran out of one side into the body of the hoop, the kind of crack a bad weld throws when it is heated and quenched. And the road face over that weld was not polished bright like the rest of the hoop. It was greyed, and only just beginning to shine. 3 weeks of road on that, said Ezra. Maybe 4. Say it in a way a jury can hold, Ezra. The smith turned the hoop under his hands. That there's my weld, and it's 11-month-old, he said. That there's some other man's weld, and it's a month old, and it's a poor bloody weld, and when he made it he took the iron out of the middle to make the circle less. That's all that is. You don't put a second weld in a hoop unless you want it shorter, and you don't want it shorter unless you're setting it again. Dinah put her hand flat on the cold iron. 2 welds, she said. 8 bolts, 7/8 of an inch. She went to the laundry that evening, which was the hardest walk of her life. Hannah Fenn was folding sheets in the wet heat with 2 other women, and when she saw who was in the doorway, she put the sheet down, and the other 2 went out without being told. I'll ask you one thing, Dinah said, and then I'll go, and I'll not come here again unless you send for me. On the 23rd of February, Kit went with the cart to Melbury to fetch the wheel home. Did he say anything to you about that day? You've a nerve, said Hannah Fenn. I have. They're saying you fired your own shop. I know what they're saying. Did he say anything about that day? Hannah Fenn stood with her red hands on the edge of the copper and looked at the wall, and it took her a long time, and Dinah did not fill the silence, because she had learnt that much from her father at least. He was late back, Hannah said at last, 4 hours late, and I'd have skinned him, only he come in that pleased with himself. She stopped. He'd been kept waiting in the yard, he says. He says, Mother, they had a fire going all round a great iron hoop, laid on bricks, and 6 of them stood round it with tongs, and they wouldn't be hurried for nobody, and I watched it till it went the colour of the sun. Her voice went. He was 15. He'd never seen a tie ring. He thought it was the finest thing he ever saw in his life. Hannah and their foreman give him a shilling, Hannah Fenn said, and told him not to be telling up at the court how long he'd waited, for it makes a shop look slow. And he give me the shilling that night. She reached into her apron and put it on the ironing board between them. A shilling of the year 1811, worn. I've had it in my pocket ever since, she said. I've took it out about 400 times. Dinah did not touch it. Will you say that in the room on the 21st, she said, in front of Mr. Gorick, and in front of the Duke, and in front of everybody at Ashlade who has been coming to your door for a fortnight to tell you it was me? Hannah Fenn picked up the shilling and closed her hand round it. You'd better be right, she said. On the 16th of March, Mr. Palliser laid an information before Sir Anthony Roth at Melbury, and Sir Anthony, who was 74 and disliked being disturbed, granted a warrant for the apprehension of Dinah Verrall, spinster, of Harbury, on suspicion of wilfully setting fire to an outbuilding, the property of His Grace the Duke of Harbury. The Duke rode to Melbury the same afternoon and was in Sir Anthony's book-room within the hour. What actually passed was that Sir Anthony observed that a fortnight in the House of Correction would answer everybody, and that the Duke replied that the outbuilding was his, and the evidence was his, and he had put the one inside the other himself against advice, and would say so on oath, and that if Sir Anthony wanted a prisoner for the fire, he had better take the man who ordered the tire carried out of that shop the night before it burned. The warrant was not executed. Sir Anthony bound her over in £50 to appear on the 21st, and went back to his dinner in a bad temper. That night the Duke wrote to the coroner and asked for the adjourned inquest to be held, not in the long room of the Harbury Arms, but in the forecourt of Harbury Court. He gave his reasons in 4 lines, that the evidence now included 2 wheels, 1 hoop, a forge fire, and a quantity of iron, none of which would go up an inn staircase. That a jury asked to decide how a wheel behaves ought to be shown a wheel behaving, and that the whole parish believed a thing about a woman which he now had reason to think false, and had better therefore be able to stand and watch. Mr. Ballantyne, who had been a coroner for 19 years and had never once been offered a case he could see with his own eyes, wrote back by return and agreed. The mate wheel was still on the wreck. That was the thing Dinah had understood at 4 a.m. on the day after the fire, sitting on the tiring platform with the 16 open on her knee, and it had gone through her like brandy. The chariot had carried 2 4-wheels, made in the same week out of the same tree, on the same bench, by the same 2 hands, entered on the same page of the book, and tired in the same fire on the same afternoon in May, out of 2 hoops Ezra Dunnage had welded from 1 length of bar. One of them had gone to Melbury in February. The other had not. The other had come off the wreck of the chariot on Barrow Hill, unhurt except for a scrape, and had lain in Mr. Crail's coach house ever since, because nobody had thought it worth anything at all. She went to the Duke at 7 a.m, and he came down to the stable court in his dressing gown and boots, and the near side 4-wheel was brought out into the light and stood against the mounting block, and Dinah walked round it once and then leaned her forehead against the felloe. "Say it," said the Duke. "This is the answer to everything, Your Grace." She lifted her head. "Every objection they have made to me is an objection about my honesty. My book, my tool, my word, this wheel is not my word. It is a thing they have had in their own keeping for a fortnight, and thought was rubbish. It was made in the same week as the wheel that killed him, and it has never been to Melbury. Whatever this wheel measures is what that wheel measured on the 3rd of March. He had it carried into the strong room under the house, where his mother's plate was kept, and put the key on his own ring, and set 2 men on the door. They measured it that morning in front of the coroner's officer, with the officer holding the chalk. Dish, 1 inch and a quarter, 3 times measured. Bolts, 6, hand forged, 4 facets to the head, with the 4th one short. The hoop upon it, 14 turns and 1 inch and 1/8 by the traveller, upon a wheel of 14 turns and 1 inch and a half, 3/8 of an inch of draw. Every figure in the book. The officer, whose name was Bunce, wrote it all down and then said, in the voice of a man who has been in a great many rooms where people were lying to him, "Miss, that's the neatest bit of evidence I ever see in my life, and I've took down a murder. She had 5 days. She spent them building a fire. The tiring platform had come through the burning without a mark on it, being a slab of Purbeck stone 6 feet across with an iron pin in the middle, and it had been in that yard since before the American War. Dinah had the ashes carted off it, and the ground round it swept and levelled and laid with old bricks in a ring. And Ezra Dunnage brought down the tire dogs and the sledge and 4 water cans. On the 18th, old Michael Skeet the sawyer, who was Toby's grandfather, and had not spoken to Dinah since the 4th of March, came into the yard with 2 carpenters and a load of faggots on a cart, and unloaded them without saying anything, and stacked them, and went away again. On the 19th, 2 of the Ashlade women came up with a basket of bread and a can of beer, left it on the platform, and would not stay. On the 20th, Hannah Fenn came into the stable court in her Sunday black and looked at the pile of faggots for a long time, and then said, "How hot does it have to be?" "Cherry red all round," Dinah said. "It has to grow. Iron grows when it is hot, near 1/4 of an inch in 14 feet at a good red, and that is the whole trick of it. You make the hoop too small, and then you make it big with fire, and you drop it on, and you take the fire out of it with water, and it comes home. And if you cut a piece out of it first, then it comes home too far," Dinah said, "and goes on coming." Down at the Harbury Arms that night, Amos Pike, foreman to Mr. Silas Gorick, drank 4 pots of beer and told the room twice that he had been in the trade since he was 9 and did not care what any woman said about a wheel, and then went out and was sick in the yard and stood a long while in the dark holding on to the pump. The 21st of March came up grey and clear, with the wind off the downs and the rooks going over, and by 10 o'clock there were 400 people in the forecourt of Harbury Court. The coroner's table stood on the bottom step under the portico, the 14 jurymen on benches to one side, the parish behind a rope on the gravel. The 2 great wheels stood on the tiring platform at the far end, the near side forewheel of the travelling chariot sound 4'6", its spokes new scrubbed, and beside it, leaning on a trestle, the black hoop out of the nettles behind the forge. Ezra Dunnage's fire had been alight in the ring of bricks since 7. The Duke stood at the foot of the steps, bare-headed, in black. Mr. Gorick sat with his hat on his knee. Mr. Cryer stood by the stable arch. Mr. Palliser had a portfolio. Mr. Ballantyne opened the adjourned inquest at 10:30, and said that he had never in 19 years held a court in the open air, and hoped never to do so again, and that the jury would be good enough to remember that they were a jury and not a fair. Mr. Palliser was heard first, and he was very short and very grave, and he did the most damage of the day in 90 seconds. He said that since the last sitting, a document had come to light, that the shop books had lain in the estate office by the coroner's own order, and that he thought it his duty to lay a certain entry before the court. He passed the 16 up to the table with a marker in it. The coroner read the entry aloud to the jury, twice, 3 May. Chariot for wheels, tires brought up 3/4 inch to tighten. D.V. The sound that went round that forecourt was not a shout. It was 400 people breathing out at once. "Miss Verrall," said the coroner, "is that your hand?" "It is very like my hand, sir." "Did you write it?" "No, sir." "Do you say it is forged?" "I do." "Then I must tell you that you are saying a good deal." "Sir," said Dinah Verrall, "I am saying less than the wheels are. May I have the near side fore wheel brought forward, and may Mr. Bunce hold the chalk, and may Mr. Gorick stand where he can see, for I shall want him." She took them through it, standing on the tiring platform in her father's leather apron with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she did not raise her voice once, and afterwards men who had been at Waterloo said they had never heard 400 people so quiet. She began with the pair, 2 fore wheels, made together in April of 1816 out of 1 elm butt and 1 oak and 1 stack of ash, entered on 1 page, tired in 1 fire out of 2 hoops Ezra Dunnage had welded from a single bar, twins in every particular. One had gone to Melbury on the 9th of February and come home painted on the 23rd. The other had never left the estate, and had lain in Mr. Crale's coach house since the 4th of March, unregarded. Mr. Bunce, the dish. Bunce laid the beech straightage across the fellows, and measured down and called it out, 1 inch and a quarter. The book says 1 inch and a quarter. The dead wheel measured 2 inches and 1/8. Mr. Bunce, the bolts. 6. Every head 4 facetted with the 4th facet short. The book says 6. The dead wheel gave up 8 out of the ashes, and 2 of them were cut on a screw plate that does not exist on this estate. Mr. Bunce, the traveller, if you please, and count aloud so the jury may count with you. Bunce knelt in the gravel with the little iron wheel and rolled it round the hoop of the sound wheel and counted, and 400 people counted with him under their breath, and at the end he said, 14 turns and 1.5 inches round the wood, 14 turns and 1 inch and 1/8 round the iron. 3/8 of an inch of draw, said Dinah. The draw my father used on carriage wheels for 41 years. It is in every one of those 9 books, and His Grace has read all 9. I have read all 9, said the Duke. And now, sir, Dinah said to the coroner, I come to the entry, because that wheel has already answered it. The entry says tires. Plural, it says both forewheels were brought up 3/4 of an inch on the 3rd of May. There stands one of those 2 forewheels. It has never been off this estate. It carries 3/8 of an inch of draw and 1.25 inches of dish, exactly as the book says, and no man alive can put 3/4 of an inch of draw on a wheel and leave it looking like that. She let that stand a moment. Whoever wrote that line had to write tires, because he knew the chariot had 2 forewheels and did not know that only one had ever been touched. He forged a lie about a wheel that was sitting 50 yards from his desk. Mr. Palliser's portfolio was on his knee, and both his hands were flat upon it. And one thing more, sir, and it is small, and I ask the jury to hold it. The line says 3/4 of an inch. There is not 1 inch written in 9 volumes and 41 years. In that trade you write turns and eighths, because that is what the traveller gives you. Look at the page. Every line above it is turns and eighths. That one line is in inches. It was written by somebody who could read my handwriting and could not read my trade. Then she called Ezra Dunnage, and the smith came up onto the platform in his apron and put his hand on the black hoop the way another man would put his hand on a horse. He had welded that hoop in May of 1816. His weld was there, and he pointed to it, a long scarf, filed off, worn bright, 11 months of road on it. 3 feet round the circle was a second weld, and he pointed to that, short, upset, unfiled on the inner face, hammer facets standing, a hair crack running out of it, and the road face over it grey and hardly polished at all. How old is that one, Mr. Dunnage? 3 week, said Ezra. 4 at the outside. And why does a man put a second weld in a hoop? To make it less, said Ezra Dunnage. There ain't no other reason on God's earth. Bunce ran the traveller round the black hoop then, on his knees on the platform, counting aloud, and the count came home at 14 turns and 1/4 of an inch. 14 turns and 1/4, said Dinah, against 14 turns and 1 inch and 1/8 on its twin. That hoop is 7/8 of an inch shorter than the hoop that came off the same bar in the same fire. Set that on a wheel of 14 turns, and 1.5 inches, and you have a draw of 1 inch and 1/4, where my father allowed 3/8, and where Mr. Gorick himself told this court a week ago that too much draw will crush a wheel to death. Hannah Fenn was sworn at noon, and gave her evidence in a flat voice with her chin up, and put the shilling on the coroner's table, and would not take it back, and had to be led away by 2 women. At 12:30, Mr. Bunce produced the day book of Gorick's yard at Melbury, which he had fetched on the 18th with the coroner's order in his pocket. The coroner read out the entry for the 22nd of February. Chariot 4Y. For Harbury. Tire cut and shut. 1 in, reset and painted. A. Pike, S. Hollick, 4 hars, cut and shut, said the coroner. Miss Verrall, what is that? It is the trade's own words, sir, for cutting a piece out of a tire and welding the ends up again to make the hoop smaller. There is no other meaning. It is there in his own yard book in his own foreman's hand, and the bill that came up to this estate for that fortnight says only painting and small repairs, £4.12 and 6pence, and it was ordered by Mr. Crail and passed by Mr. Palliser. Then she said, sir, the jury has heard a great deal of arithmetic. I would like them to see it. With the coroner's leave and his graces, I will set that hoop on that wheel. Leave was given. It took 40 minutes, and the whole forecourt watched every one of them. The black hoop went into the fire on the brick ring, laid flat on the bed of coals, and Ezra fed the faggots round it, and the iron went from black to brown to dull cherry, and the heat came off it across the gravel, so that the front rank of the crowd stepped back without noticing they had done it. The sound wheel was laid flat on the Purbeck slab and pinned at the nave. They lifted the hoop out with the tire dogs, 6 men on the tongs, glowing, trailing a thin flame of its own scale, and carried it, and dropped it over the wheel, and it went on, hot iron grows, it went on, and it seated, and Ezra beat it down all round with the sledge in 11 blows, and Dinah shouted water. And the cans came, and the steam went up in a white cloud 20 feet over the forecourt of Harbury Court. And in the middle of that cloud the wheel began to speak. It creaked first, a long complaining note like a ship. Then there was a splitting, tearing series of small cracks, as the shoulders of 12 oak spokes were driven into the felloes and burst. Then, as the iron came home and went on coming, the whole wheel moved, the rim drew in and the spokes leaned, and the dish deepened while 400 people watched it happen, out of 1 1/4 inches towards 2 inches and more. And then the nave split. It went with a report like a fowling piece, flat and loud off the front of the house, and every horse in the stable court threw its head up, and a jackdaw came off the roof, and somewhere behind the rope a woman screamed. When the steam cleared, the wheel lay on the stone with its elm nave opened from mortice to mortice, and its spokes loose in it, exactly and in every particular as its twin had lain in a ditch on Barrow Hill on the 4th of March. Dinah Verrall put down the water can. "That is what killed Kit Fenn," she said. "It took me 40 minutes in front of you all. It took them 4 hours in a yard at Melbury on the 22nd of February, and then they painted over it." Amos Pike stood up in the second row with his hat in his 2 hands and said, "Sir, I only done what I was bid." And the constable had him by the arm before he got to the end of it. The jury withdrew to the harness room at 20 minutes to 3, and came back in 19 minutes. They found that Christopher Fenn, aged 15, had come by his death through the failure of the offside forewheel of the Duke of Harbury's travelling chariot on Barrow Hill on the 4th of March. That the said wheel was sound when made, and was rendered unsound by the cutting and resetting of its tire at the yard of Silas Gorick of Melbury on the 22nd of February, and that the said Silas Gorick and the said Amos Pike were guilty of the manslaughter of the said Christopher Fenn. They added, of their own motion and against Mr. Ballantyne's advice, that they wished it recorded that no blame of any description attached to Miss Dinah Verrall, wheelwright, of this parish, and that the record should say so in those words. The foreman was old Michael Skeet, the sawyer, who had not spoken to her for a fortnight. The rest was the slow business of the law, and it did not happen in one afternoon. Aaron Betts, undergroom who had wheeled the tire down to the forge on the night of the 12th, made a statement at Salisbury that Mr. Crail had sent him for the iron, and had mentioned that the shop was full of shavings and a lantern hung on a nail by the bench, and had given him a crown, and had not told him in so many words to do anything at all. He wept a good deal. He was 19. Mr. Crail was dismissed the Duke's service on the 22nd of March, and committed on the 26th. Mr. Palliser lasted 3 days longer, because his was a paper crime and paper takes time. It was the Duke himself who found it, going through the agent's own accounts at midnight with a candle and no idea what he was looking for, in the same dogged way he had read 9 shop books. Against the head of the Melbury carriage contract, in a private memorandum, stood a note of £50 a year, described as a commission on savings effected, and the contract was to run 7 years. Mr. Palliser had stood to make £350 out of closing a shop that cost the estate 75 a year. When the wheel broke on Barrow Hill, he had not set out to protect a murderer. He had set out to protect a saving. He was committed for the forgery at the summer assizes and transported for 7 years. Gorick was fined £200 and had 18 months in Fisherton Gaol, and his yard was sold. Pike had 12 months, and said at his trial, and everybody believed him, that he had never meant to hurt anybody, that a rattle had been complained of, and a shilling a wheel to be saved, and that cutting and shutting a tire was a thing he had done 40 times. And how many of those 40, said the judge, were carriage wheels off a hill road with a boy behind? Pike had no answer. They buried Kit Fenn on the 24th of March in Ashlade churchyard, with 300 people there. Afterwards Hannah Fenn came across the grass to where Dinah stood apart by the wall, and took her hand, and turned it over, and put the shilling into it, and closed her fingers on it. "I can't keep it now," she said. "I've took it out too many times. You take it out instead." Ezra Dunnage pierced it that week with the smallest punch he had, and it hung after that on the nail by the door of the new shop, beside the traveller, and turned in the draught when the door opened, and every apprentice who came into that shop was told whose it had been on his first morning, before he was shown a single tool. The new shop was built of stone with a slate roof, because the Duke said he had had enough of shavings and thatch, and went up on the old footings between the forge and the sawpit, with the Purbeck tiring platform where it had always been, and the scorch of the 21st of March still on it. Over the door the estate mason cut 2 lines, because the Duke sent down the wording himself, and would not be argued out of it. J. Verrall, wheelwright here, 1776. 1816 D. Verrall, wheelwright here, 1816. The Harbury carriage and wagon work was put under her mark by an agreement of 11 years, and the mark itself 3 strokes of her father's die. A V with a nick in the left stroke was struck from that spring on the nave hoop of every wheel and the plate of every vehicle that left the yard. She took 2 apprentices at Michaelmas. Toby Skeet came out of his time in 1819 and stayed. The Duke came down to the shop on the last day of April, when the doors had been hung a week, and the smell of the place was still stone and mortar instead of elm. He came alone and on foot, and stood in the doorway until she saw him, and then came in and put a parcel on the bench. It was the 9 books, rebound in Salisbury in plain calf with the years on the spine in gilt, and a 10th volume blank, bound to match. "I did not have anything put on the new one," he said. "I did not know what you would want on it." Dinah opened it. Ruled, unmarked, good paper. "Your Grace," she said, "I have owed you a question for a month, and could not find the words for it. On the 11th of March you gave me the wheel and the hoop, and put them in my own shop under my own lock, and everyone in this county told you it was madness, and 2 nights later you very nearly lost your case, and I very nearly lost that boy in the loft. Why did you do it?" The Duke looked at the traveller hanging on its nail with the pierced shilling beside it. "Because I could not judge you," he said, "and I could judge your father's handwriting. 41 years of entering his own mistakes in a book that nobody was ever going to read." He turned. "I have spent 5 years being told things by men who are paid to tell me things. I am tired of it. I would rather be shown." "It is not a mystery," Dinah said. "Anybody may be shown. It only wants somebody willing to stand in the yard and count. Then teach me the traveller." She looked at him to see whether it was a courtesy. It was not. So she took it down off the nail, and they went out into the yard, into the light, where the new wheel for the home farm wagon stood chalked on the block, and half the stable court found some reason to cross that yard in the next quarter of an hour, and the Duke of Harbury knelt on his own gravel in a good coat, and rolled a small iron wheel round a large wooden one, and counted aloud, and got it wrong, and did it again. At the end of it he stood up and gave her back the traveller, and then, in front of 11 of his own servants, he took off his hat to her. "An inch and a quarter of dish," he said. "Why is a wheel built crooked, Miss Verrall?" "Because the road is not kind," said Dinah, "and a thing built flat has nothing to give. It is the lean in it that lets it carry." She hung the traveller on the nail, and the shilling turned on its nail beside it, and out in the yard the blackbird started up again. "My father used to say, 'Elm splits last of all the woods, your grace, because the grain in it runs every road at once.' He meant the timber. I never once heard him say he meant anything else. But he said it to me a great deal more often than the wheels required."